Welcome to the Yeshua community. In this episode, we explore the opening chapters of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapters 1 through 6. What was really happening in the Corinthian community? Why does Paul speak so strongly about division, wisdom, and discipline? And what do these texts reveal, not only about the community, but about Paul himself?
Corinth was not a quiet village. It was a bustling, strategic city, situated on the narrow isthmus that connected northern and southern Greece. Trade flowed through it from east and west. Merchants, sailors, philosophers, and travelers passed through its streets every day. It was a place of wealth, but also of social tension. A place where cultures mixed and where ideas competed. And it was far from Jerusalem. Not only in distance, over 1,000 kilometers by land and sea, but also in worldview. The rhythms of the Torah, the traditions of Israel, the language of the prophets, these were not the natural foundation of Corinthian life. So when a community formed there around the message of Yeshua, it did not grow out of familiar soil. It emerged in a city shaped by trade, status, philosophy, and diversity. And perhaps that helps us understand the letter we are about to explore. Because this is not a community at peace. It is a community trying to find its identity, far from Jerusalem, and in the middle of a very different world. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians is one of the most well-known texts in the New Testament. Many people have read parts of it, quoted individual verses, or heard it used in teaching. But when you read chapters 1 through 6 as a whole, a different picture begins to emerge. This is not a systematic textbook of theology. It is a letter written into a concrete situation, a community marked by conflict, tension, and unclear boundaries. And perhaps that is exactly why the text feels both alive and challenging. Let us begin at the start. Paul opens the letter by addressing divisions within the community. Some say, "I belong to Paul." Others say, "I belong to Apollos." And still others, "I belong to Cephas." But what does this actually mean? We are not told what these groups stood for. Were these theological disagreements? Different ways of understanding Yeshua? Or were they more personal loyalties, preferences for certain leaders? The text does not say, and that affects how we read it. Paul reacts strongly to the division, but without explaining what the conflict actually consists of. So we are left standing somewhat outside the situation. We see the reaction, but not the full cause. Then Paul moves to another theme, what he calls the wisdom of the world. He said this wisdom does not lead to God, and that the message of the crucified Messiah appears as foolishness to the world. But again, a question arises. What is this wisdom of the world? Paul does not name specific philosophers, schools, or ideas. He gives no precise definition. So the concept becomes more of a rhetorical contrast than a concrete analysis. It works in speech. It creates a strong opposition, but it does not necessarily provide clarity. In chapter 2, he goes a step further. He speaks of a hidden wisdom, a wisdom that can only be understood through the Spirit. This is an interesting statement, because here we move from something open and testable to something more internal and experiential. But what does this wisdom consist of? Paul does not clearly explain it. He describes how it is received through the Spirit, but not what it actually contains. And this creates a challenge. If the content is not explained, it becomes difficult to examine or discuss. It becomes something one either has or does not have. This may create a strong sense of insight for some, but also a certain lack of clarity for the reader. In chapter 3, Paul returns to the condition of the community. He says they are still immature, like children who need milk rather than solid food. Then he uses an image. He has laid a foundation, and that foundation is the Messiah. But again, what does that mean? Is the foundation belief in the Messiah as a person? His message? His teaching? Paul does not specify. He says others are building on this foundation and that each person must take care how they build. But the foundation itself, what it concretely consists of, remains partly undefined. At the same time, he insists that no one can lay another foundation than the one already laid. It is a strong statement, but without a clear definition of the foundation, it also remains open. Throughout these chapters, Paul also defends his own role. And here we see something interesting. He describes himself in several ways at once. He is a servant, someone who does not seek honor. He is a suffering apostle, someone who has been humiliated and rejected. But he is also a father figure, someone who has the authority to instruct and correct. These roles exist side by side, and this creates a layered picture. On one hand, humility, on the other, authority. This may be natural, people often hold multiple roles, but it can also create a certain tension in the text. When we come to chapter 5, the situation becomes more concrete. Here Paul mentions a specific case, a man living with his father's wife. This is described as serious, even worse than what is found outside the community. But here too, there are things we are not told. What is the background of the situation? How did it develop? Has the community already tried to deal with it? We are given no details. Instead, Paul moves quickly to a solution. The man is to be handed over to Satan. This is a phrase that has raised many questions. What does it mean? Is it a form of exclusion? A symbolic act? Or something more concrete within Paul's worldview? The text does not explain. He also says this should be done when you are assembled. But who is you? The entire community? The leaders? A specific group? Again, it remains open. What is clear is that Paul sees the situation as serious and believes a decisive response is necessary. But here again, a tension appears. Earlier in the letter, he described the community as immature, like children in a process of growth. But here, there is no gradual development. Instead, there is immediate and strict action, exclusion. How do we reconcile this? Are there different kinds of issues, some requiring patience, others requiring decisive action? Or is this an internal tension in Paul's approach? The text does not give a clear answer, but it does reveal this complexity. In chapter 6, Paul turns to another issue, lawsuits between members of the community. He criticizes them for taking disputes to secular courts. He asks rhetorically, "Can you not judge among yourselves?" This is an interesting perspective. It emphasizes the responsibility of the community to handle its own conflicts. But then something happens in the text. The discussion shifts into a list of people who will not inherit the kingdom of God. The list includes various forms of wrongdoing, both economic and sexual. And here, different themes are blended together. We move from legal disputes, how conflicts are handled, to moral evaluation of behavior. This can make the passage more complex to interpret. Is the issue the lawsuits themselves, or do they reveal a deeper moral problem within the community? Paul does not explicitly explain how these elements are connected, but he concludes with a reminder, "Such were some of you." This points toward transformation, the idea that people can live differently. But again, it is worth noting how the argument is structured. It is not systematic in a modern sense. It moves from theme to theme, from image to image, from exhortation to exhortation. When we look at chapters 1 through 6 as a whole, a clear impression emerges. This is not a calm, structured presentation of doctrine. It is a letter written into a complex and unsettled situation. Paul is trying to address multiple conflicts at once, divisions, immaturity, moral challenges, legal disputes. And in responding to this, he uses strong rhetorical tools. He uses contrasts between wisdom and foolishness. He uses images, building, body, family. He uses exhortations, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, but he rarely explains every detail. He may assume that the original audience already understood the situation. But for us as readers today, this means that much remains open. And perhaps this is also where the strength of the text lies. It does not give fully developed answers to every question. It shows us a process, a leader trying to navigate a complex reality, a community that is not perfect but in development, and a text that carries both engagement and incompleteness. As we read this, we can ask ourselves a few questions. What does it mean that the conflicts are not fully explained? How does it shape our understanding of authority when the role is both humble and directive? How should we relate to the tension between patience and discipline? And what happens when key concepts like wisdom and spirit are not clearly defined? Perhaps there are no simple answers, but perhaps it is precisely in these questions that the text continues to live.
Thank you for listening to the Yeshua community. In the next episode, we continue our journey through 1 Corinthians, exploring chapters 7 through 16. If you found this episode meaningful, consider sharing it with others who are exploring these questions. And if you would like to follow future episodes, you are welcome to subscribe. See you next time.